Hello and welcome back to the channel. I am Jeremy at Brendle Concepts, and we have had a lot of progress since our last episode. As you can see, I now have wings at the base of the car. Last time we were here, we were getting rid of the winglets with foam. I have since, gone on to add the new blade, as I like to call it. I don't really like to call it a winglet because that to me sounds cheap and, I don't know, Pep Boys. So I've added these blades or wings to the base of the car and added some foam here to kind of really show what the overall design is going to look like. Really excited about this because for me, I see this image in my head for, from the initial design all the way to the end product. So for everybody that's kind of been following along, there's a lot of times where people are scratching their head going, what's he doing? And everything that I do has a purpose and a time. So to be at this point where this is really the last step for the body here before I can go to fiberglass. I mean, there's little details, cleanup work that has to be done, but as far as the major fab, this was the last little step. So, to be able to kind of show everyone now, here we go, it's kind of a big deal for me. And it took a lot to get here, a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but there was things that were kind of out of my control. And that's just life. And, that's part of, custom. So, today's episode, though, we are going to get into how I made these. We're going to go into rolling round rod. I've covered rolling round rod before, but this is a little bit different because we have multiple angles that we are going to roll. So I'm going to show you how I roll them, how I bend them, and we're also going to look at the front end a little bit because I've started the process of making fender liners. I'm going to cover that in the next episode. I want to do a whole episode in that in itself because I think it pertains to so many other applications just beyond this build. I mean, knowing how you can make a template to make a new fender liner, I think it's a lot of information people would want for any build, really. So we're going to go over that next time. Like I said, we're going to walk along the car here, show you what these wings or blades are going to look like or do look like, and then we're going to get into rolling the round rod. So let's take a look. So I'm going to start off with the wings on the back end here, and I'm just going to walk forward and explain kind of what I was going for. The original winglet, like I said, I really hated how it just kind of floated on the body. It didn't really transition well for me. And as you can see, what I'm going for here now is to make this port blend into the top side of the winglet. So if you follow this port here, this, once it gets fiberglass, will build up in material thickness and kind of blend into the very top line of the original OEM winglet. From there, the port comes around and will blend into this blade. And right here will be a transition point where you'll kind of get the inside of the port blending into the blade here. I'm going to do a color separation with paint to define the two, but that's kind of what I want, is that this solid, one flowing piece, because in my mind, it flows the best with the overall design of the Supra, because when you look at the Supra, there's just a lot of really nice, gentle curves, and everything just blends really well. So one of the other things that I really like with the wheel arch here is having it blend right into this wing. So this point right here and this point intersect. So when you look at this car, the wing actually starts from point of the arch here and then blends back in. So once everything is fully bonded and feathered and everything like that, I think it's going to really transition very well and look much better than the way the original winglets looked, in my opinion. So I'm going to move on to the door section here. And this is probably one of the trickiest sections of designing the car for me. So we'll take a look at that now. On the original design of the Supra, one of the biggest, mind benders for me was this section of the door. because everything else on the body, you know, is seamless, flows really well. And then you get to this. And number one, it's a fake vent, which I don't know why, you know, they did that, but they did that. To think of a Supra, you know, and think of it having, you know, cheesy, fake, plasticky bits, it does, and it blows me away and it drives me crazy, but, you know, I can only do so much. So in my mind, the best thing I could do was simply make it go away. And the best way I know how to do that is blend it. So initially, I wanted to play with this arch right here because I thought it was a really cool shape and I thought it would blend somehow really well into here. And when I came up with the port idea, that's really what cemented this concept for me. The other thing that I really wanted to pull off, which is down in here, because this side skirt, and we'll see it up front, starts from basically a vanishing point and then becomes a winglet. And one of the things that I think looks really, I don't know, high end, especially on like, you know, supercars, is when you see body lines that go into air openings. So by creating this port, whoops, the foam's in here loose just so I can match side to side. By creating this port and extending over the original side skirt, I now created this look because it kind of mirrors this right here. And like I said, by stepping over it, now I've kind of created that body line that disappears into an air opening or into this port. So I think it gives it, I don't know, more of a refined feel or a higher end feel than the original side skirt and that little winglet just kind of ending right there. But yeah, so figuring this section out to make all of this blend, you know, was probably the trickiest part. This fiberglass that's X'd right here, this is all going to be cut out. So this will all be original, you know, look original. It'll all get feathered back in once it's bonded. And, you know, when you look inside, I think all these lines in this section of the car are really going to define this build in particular, among other Supras. So really happy with how this turned out. We'll take a look at the front next. So starting on the back side of the front end, what I've done here is essentially just add a little bit of a wing to balance out the bottom end of the car here. This part in particular, I think is really cool because the side skirt actually starts from basically a vanishing point. And what I will do is trim my fiberglass to expose that entire side skirt so you see that it begins here and transitions in the back. But my wing also rolls right into that starting point. Same with the port becoming, you know, integrated into that wing. So I think although this is a little section, I think it's a really cool section because you have this vanishing point right here where this wing actually transitions right into that. You know, a lot of people try to over embellish, especially in my opinion, and just my opinion, with the side skirt area. And the reason I tend to not is because when you're talking about making something look wider, leaving the meat of the car, the middle of the car, closer to stock really accentuates the width that you're adding. So by adding giant side skirts to kind of make it look proportionally correct, in my eyes, a lot of times it misses the mark because overall proportions just do not stretch every direction. So making the base of the car in the middle really wide kind of detracts from the overall design, in my opinion. Plus, I hate the fact that when you get in your car, you feel like you're stepping over a damn puddle. There's also that. So for me, minimal, you know, areas of you know, fabrication here in the middle of the car, and that was intentional because I really want to play on this stuff. Like I said, especially when you have such cool features like vanishing points that you can already play with, there's no need to go to the extremes and build something that's 2 feet wider than really it needs to be. So we'll just take at the look at the front here, and this will be the last section, and then I'll come back and explain what I've got going on in the fender liners. So this is the last section to look at, and it is the beginning of the car, and this is the initial thing that most people will see walking up to this car. I mean, obviously from a distance, it's going to look wide, but the way that I've angled these blades has kind of a downward angle. It's more of an aggressive look to me. I don't like the fact that the winglets originally on the car were straight up and down. To me, it just gave this very flat, I don't know. And honestly, it was just a cookie cutter feel. And I know it was an OEM car, but I think they just could have done more. They could have given those winglets some shape, a little bit of depth and dimension. It would have done wonders for it. But, you know, for me, adding these wings that actually come out of the car, it doesn't scream Pep Boys. It screams like, you know, aerodynamics and like functionality. And hey, that thing looks like it could go fast. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm going for. And like I said, I angled it down a little bit. And really, it's the same thing as all the other ones. I'm just blending into this port. Same with the back side of the car. The only difference is on the bottom section here, I'm actually blending into a bottom line here as opposed to blending into a top line. I have a little bit of a step over here that I'm doing that kind of follows the bumper a little bit more. So I want to keep a little bit different look here and changed it up down here. And that's the only variation really between the front and the rear of the car. And that's simply because the original design of the car dictated it that way. So that's pretty much the wings and why I did what I did. And let's take a look at what I've got going on the fender liners. So here is a look at the initial stages of the inside fender liner for the front end. I started with the back section right here because right here is the reservoir for the windshield wipers. And it is one of the hardest sections. You can't obviously see the bottle, it's covered. But it was one of the trickiest sections that I was going to have to deal with. So I figured if this was going to work the way I wanted it to, I might as well just go for the worst and get it out of the way. This is what I essentially came up with. Now, I'm going to go over this in the next how-to video because I think, like I said earlier, there's a lot of information here that people will want. Not even just for this build, but, you know, for other builds in particular that need fender liners. So I'm going to go over the whole template process and how I'm making it. But you can see right here how I've got a good section that I was actually able, you know, to cover off. And I've gone way up in here to protect as much as I can. And I still have a little bit of refinement where I can even go a little bit higher. So all in all, very optimistic and very happy with how this part of the process is turning out. And, you know, like I said, the next how-to is going to be getting this this section of it just squared away and transferring over to the ABS plastic. All right, for this how-to, I am going to demonstrate how I'm going to roll this round rod. I'm going to give this a try. The camera angle to try and show all of this, really, it's kind of difficult. It just sucks. So I'm going to do my best here. Hopefully it turns out good, but we'll give it a try. So first thing I'm going to go over is, I believed I picked this roller up off of Amazon. Any of these little rollers that you can get for like under $100, they're fine. I mean, the only thing that I will say is if you've never rolled round rod before, you may want to buy something that actually has a dial that you can kind of see notches or some sort of indication of how much you're turning. This one is completely by feel. So, you know, after I've used it a lot, I know how much pressure, I mean, like how much to turn to get roughly how much I want out of the rod. And it is literally just doing it over and over again until I figure it out. I think I paid like less than $80 for this one. It actually works really well. My only complaint, and I've had this over the years with other round rod rollers, is that they want to spin the rod as you roll it through, as it's adding pressure, wants to kind of twist the rod, which isn't a big deal because I just hold it with a pair of pliers. But for whatever reason, this one in particular seems to really want to twist it more so than I've ever seen. So again, it's not that big of a deal, but I will show you how I, kind of mitigate that. First thing is, pliers. When I put this through my roller, I'm literally just going to grab it and I'm going to feed it through just like this. The other thing that I do is use a marker and literally just make a line, a straight line on the rod. Now, I do this because as I'm feeding it through my roller, I can see if this is twisting. Pretty basic, but it helps quite a bit. So when we're talking about rolling round rod like this, these two little things, if you've never tried to roll round rod before and you want to pick up a little roller like this, just get a cheap pair of pliers, get yourself a marker, make a center line on your rod and just hold it. And as you're feeding it through, watch your center line as it goes through here and make sure that it's staying straight. It's the easiest way to stop, this thing from spinning. Reason being is like if you keep turning, like as you adjust this thing, especially if you have to take it out of the roller, when you go to put it back in, you might be off. So in the application that I'm going to be doing now, where I have to make two different radius rolls on this thing, it's really important that this center line stays center, because when I want to go the reverse on the other side, if this is rolling one way, then the whole piece is going to end up twisted. So, we're going to really have to pay attention to that. The other thing that I'm just going to do is put an arbitrary bend point. And this is going to help me when I want to make two different rolls. So I'm just going to spin this rod. And again, it's an arbitrary line. And this is just going to be where I want this thing, where I want to bend it. So I like to do it that way because after I make this line, I can actually identify center on the rod. So I've done those two steps, and we'll go ahead and just roll it. And the one thing I will say about this roller is the more tension you put on it, the more it wants to spin the rod. So when I start off, I like to add just a little bit of tension, roll it through. Now I'm gonna stop at that little line that I made, that my bend point. I don't want to keep rolling past that. I only want to roll up to that point. So I'm just going to keep cranking until I hit that line, till it disappears underneath the roller, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to back it out. And this is why I really wanted to show you is I have just maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. I can see there's just a little bit of a curve. If I were to continue to like put this in here, in and out, and I did not have this center line, it'd be really easy to put this in, off center from the original roll. So now that I have that center line, I can just go right back in, center it back up, get it started. I like to roll past a little bit just because I feel the full tension on the rod. Then I'm just going to adjust it to whatever I want it. Then I will back it all the way out and start over again. That way I get that initial roll back in that rod. If you try and add tension when just a little bit of that rod is in there, it's kind of false. It gives you a false sense of how much pressure is in there because it's harder to bend a small amount of metal. So if you only have the tip sticking in, it's really hard for that to bend. Whereas if you feed it past a little bit, then it'll actually bend that metal and you get a much better feel on the dial anyway as to how much pressure is actually being applied. So now I got centered up, I'm just going to feed it through again. I'm watching my center line, get to that point where I want to stop, back it back out, and give it a good old crank. Again, I'm going to back it all the way out to get that started where I want it, like that. There we go. Roll it back out. So now that's what we have, you know. And you can see from here on out, it's kind of straight. When I measure my overall distance for how much rod I need, I like to give myself at least 1.5 inches of cutoff on either side. When I'm doing things kind of like these wings, I might give myself up to 3 inches of cutoff on either side. That allows me to kind of adjust things when I want to make my final cuts. It leaves me plenty of rod material. It also accounts for any of the rod that, as you're bending it, doesn't necessarily bend correctly. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're measuring your rod. Always account for that overhang that you need to cut off. I'm not really going for any shape in particular here. I'm just going to demonstrate it, but this isn't a very hard bend, so we're going to bend it some more. Another really good crank. Feed it through. One more, because why not? All right. So I'm looking at this rod, and the radius here, this roll, looks really nice and clean and smooth. I am going to just bend it now because we're just going to make a different shape out of it. So you can do this a lot of different ways. You can get fancy benders. You can put this in. I've seen them where it's kind of like a 90-degree setup where you have a long handle and it'll bend it super easy. You can put this in a vise and smash it. You can do whatever it is, however you want to do it. I just take a wrench and I will lay this on the flat or on the point of a wrench here. And I just, you know, literally will manhandle it. This rod's not that thick. It's pretty easy to bend, for me anyway. So the only thing is I want to make sure I'm on that center line. The reason I like doing a wrench like this is because I can actually line this thing up and see how I'm bending it as I bend it. So I like that there. And it's kind of just like, you know, breaking a nut loose. You just, you know, squeezing two wrenches together. You have a lot of force in your hands. So there you go. Made a nice, clean little bend there. Yeah, that's pretty much how I did that. So now what I'm going to do is take my pliers, and this is what I was saying about keeping things centered. You could use a vise, you could use a pair of channel locks, vice grips, whatever you got, but you want to grab that where that bend is, because now I can see. If I grab it better, right there. I'm holding this and I can see, here's my center line, and I can see right here is my center line. So by holding it right where it's bent and where it's rolled, it's kind of like holding that piece straight. Like I said, you can just put it in a vise and make it just as easy. For me, I'm just going to do it this way. I'm just used to doing it this way. So there's my center line. So now that I have, you know, the center of this side identified, I can do the same thing to get the reverse angle. And that's exactly what we'll do. So I'm just going to grab my pliers. When you have one side that's rolled already, it gets a lot easier to see it going through the roller as far as it being straight. Now here is what I was going for, but also what I wanted to show you. There's a point where the rod will actually hit the bottom roller, and that's as far as you can roll. So you have to kind of keep that into consideration, that you can only get so much contour in the rod, and then the rest is actually going to have to be bent to get the actual angle that you're going for. So you kind of got to play with angles and the contour of the rod at the same time and figure out how you want that to look. Once you figure it out, it's pretty easy to make it, but figuring out the angles can get a little difficult. So I put a little bit of roll in that. Let's crank on it some more. And I'm just going to roll till it hits that point where it can't go anymore. Then I'm just going to roll right back out. And now you can see this is what we're starting to come out with. You know, I can continue now if I wanted to. Now that I have this basic shape refined, or defined, I should say, I can go back and refine the shape by rolling this, bending this angle. You just have to play with it. And that's where making a template comes into play. So when I originally did all these blades, I made cardboard templates that were loose shapes that I wanted the end product to look like. Knowing though that, you know, with a roller like this, you can't get like hard 90-degree angles out of it. So what I came up with was much smoother, much gentler, more of a gentle type blend, but I also felt that it suited the card much better. So that's pretty much, you know, how I do the round rod. And from there, it was just a matter of cutting it and welding it onto the car. You know, I've covered that already, but I am going to show how I transfer from side to side. All right, so now that I've demonstrated how I've created these shapes by rolling the rod, I'm going to show you how I get them, you know, positioned from side to side. And basically, it's starting off with this bend line. If you remember, I talked about making a line that I could use to bend. Now I've recreated, you know, the arch on the roll on both sides. This is this piece. It just hasn't been cut, so I can't really hold it into place. But essentially, I'm going off of this line right here to locate this from both sides. And one of the easiest ways I found to do this is because when you're talking, you know, this point down here at the corner and this point up here is predetermined with the rod that I've already rolled and installed. The only thing that we have to account for now is this angle, the swing or the articulation of the blade, whatever you want to call it. And one of the best ways I found, and this is really I wanted to show you this little trick, is to use this. So it's basically just a square slide rule, whatever you want to call it. And I've taken the square end off of another one, and I've simply put them together. And what I can do now is take the base of it, and I can put this on my floor. And I've already checked the height of the car and done all the math. So I know that I can go from side to side like this, and I'm fine to do it this way. I've squared up off my floor, and I can simply come in here now right to that point. Now right here, my ruler, you know, it's straight up and down with that point I've made. And I can take this and slide this up. And I'm going to just put it into position until it makes contact. I'm not pushing up on it. I'm just going to snug it up. Now, if this ruler didn't have any kind of marking on it or any kind of indication for a measurement, it wouldn't even matter. Because if I did my math here, and you know, obviously I'd have to do measurements here, But you could use this same method without any kind of measuring, just being able to lock it and set this gap. So now when I go to the other side of the car, I can take this, put this underneath this section like this, line up this point and this point, weld it into place, and it will set the same angle. So that's pretty much it. That's the easiest way that I know how to get these blades from side to side to match on each side of the car. I can take this, do it for here, and then I'll just move to the next blade, set it for the next blade, weld the next blade in place, and so on, and get to the end of the vehicle. That's pretty much it. So that's basically, we're going to wrap up this episode. Hopefully there was a little bit of information that people found useful. Little tricks that I can throw out there as I go on, I will. Make sure that you tune in next week, or actually the next episode, because that's where I'm going to be getting into those fender liners. Excited for that episode. I think a lot of people will really dig that one. Going to be covering a lot about making templates, a lot of transferring templates over to different types of materials, explaining why I'm using the different materials I am, all the way into the ABS plastics. And with that, I'm going to show you also how to actually add backspacers to the ABS plastic to account for variations in depth inside the OEM wheel wells. So a lot to go over on that one. Again, I think it's going to be a really fun episode. So make sure you tune into that one. As always, keep up with the comments and questions. Really good engagement, and I'm really enjoying that. And as always, thank you for watching.